professor and currently the manager of the Land Grant Management Office of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. He is also serving as the curator for trees in the Museum of National History since 2012. His fields of specialization include plant taxonomy, marine botany, biodiversity conservation, and forest restoration. Professor Malabrigo is a very prolific researcher and writer. To date, he authored 147 scientific papers, including 7 books on Philippine native trees. He is the author of the book Shades of Majesty, 88 Philippine Native Trees, that won the 2013 National Book Award and the 2014 Gintong Aklat Award. He co-authored the book Biodiversity Assessment and Monitoring System for Terrestrial Ecosystems, which serves as the national standard for all protected areas in the country. He is an internationally recognized plant taxonomist, the only Filipino member of the Global Tree Specialist Group, and the Species Survival Commission for the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Currently, he is leading the IUCN Red List assessment of Philippine endemic and native trees. More recently, he was conferred the 2020 CFNR, or the College of Forestry and Natural Resources Most Outstanding Teacher Award in the field of biological sciences, and the 2020 CFNR Most Outstanding Alumnus, which is a special achievement award by the UPB-AA, Alumni Association. He is highly regarded as the Indiana Jones of Philippine native trees because of his immense experiences in the rescue and documentation of the rarest and the most threatened trees in the country. So please join with me in welcoming our speaker, Professor Pastor Malabrigo.
Okay, so the title of my talk, of my presentation for this webinar is Creating Awareness to Reverse Extinction of Trees. Mukhang bagong menu ito para sa karamihan. But anyway, so very timely for this talk. Our article just came out last month. It's a product of 44 global tree assessors all over the world. That's why kinailangan naming mag-appendix para sa authors pa lang. So in this article, we provide an overview of current knowledge regarding the number of trees that are threatened with extinction, the threats that affect them, based on the results of the global tree assessments. We also examine the potential implications of tree extinctions in terms of the functioning of biosphere and impacts on human well-being. We identified some priority actions that need to be taken to reduce the extinction risk of tree species. And this warning to humanity aims to raise awareness of the tree extinction crisis, which is a major environmental issue that requires urgent global attention. So most of my discussions, particularly the global figures, came from this article. Okay, to start with, so the first step of the global tree assessment was to compile a database of published accepted names of tree species with their native country distribution. And the compilation of taxonomic monographs in databases, the regional floras and herbarium specimens enabled us to construct this global database of tree species named Global Tree Search. It was launched in 2017. And this is now a very useful database for tree researchers. So we can search the tree species per country, and it also includes the threatened species per country. And we now know that there are approximately around 60,000 described and validly published tree species worldwide. But that number is underestimation. It's an underestimation because the global research, just like IUCN when computing or when determining conservation status, they only consider the species level. No? So taxa at or intraspecific level are not included. So kung meron tayong Ficus botryocarpa, variety linearifolia, Ficus botryocarpa, variety botryocarpa, isa lang yung mako-consider doon. So it's an underestimation. Sa ating Philippine trees, sa list natin, we have a lot of infraspecific taxa. So when it comes to the Philippines, Philippine tree diversity, our teams who is also the one working for the global tree assessment of Philippine trees, we have produced a database. Now we have developed a database, and our database suggests that around 3,391 taxa occur in the Philippines. 3,283 of these are native and 1,487 are endemic. Now, so of those 60,000 trees worldwide, how many trees are threatened? So when we say threatened, kino-consider lang natin dito yung critically endangered, and vulnerable. So we all know that IUCN is the main authority in determining the global conservation status of plants and animals. And according to the IUCN website, more than 41,000 species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction. So per plant group, it summarizes that 34% of conifers and 69% of cycads are threatened. For trees, the IUCN's coordinator for global tree assessment is the Botanic Gardens Conservation International, or BGCI. And the conservation mantra of BGCI is taxonomy gives species the name, red list assessment gives the voice. Okay, and based on the results of the global tree assessments obtained to date recently, including all published and submitted conservation assessment of trees, some are not yet published in IUCN, but we already have the assessments. So around 17,510 species of trees are threatened with extinction. That's equivalent to 29.9%. And in addition, there are 142 species recorded as extinct or extinct in the wild. Conversely, 41.5% of species are not considered to be at high risk of extinction, or those we classified as least concern. And a further 13.2% of tree species are recorded as data deficient, and many of those are only known from small, relatively unexplored areas and may be close to extinction. So if all data deficient species are threatened, so the percentage of tree species threatened with extinction could be as high as 51.3%. In the Philippines, the sole partner of BGCI for the global tree assessment of Philippine tree is the Energy Development Corporation, or EDC. The partnership started in May 2019, and the very first part of the MOA is the Red List Assessors Training for Filipino botanists conducted by BGCI themselves. But why EDC among so many organizations? So this is in recognition of the long years of population survey being done by EDC on some of the most threatened trees in the country. EDC, through its BINHI program, which started in 2008, where I serve as consultant taxonomist, has been mainstreaming the use of threatened trees in the restoration and greening programs. And one of the primary steps to mainstream those species is, of course, to determine their locations, their numbers, for future source of mother plant or mother tree. So in line with this program, EDC also partnered with Biodiversity Management Bureau for the very first Adapt a Wildlife Species program that focused on plant species. Using a science-based criteria primarily considering the species ecological and economic importance, EDC came up with 96 priority threatened trees for conservation. So we consider the economic value and the mechanical strength because these are innate characteristics of the trees that makes them endangered as they become the favorite for illegal logging or poaching. So our priority trees include the hardest and most premium woods such as the Philippine ironwood trees or the Sattostimon, the Dipterocarps, the Philippine ebony or the Jospyros species, and the Philippine sanders, the Nara, Tindalosupa, among others. The population survey data that we gathered from our 15 years of exploration are considered very important in determining the true conservation status of the species. If you look at the red list criteria, all of this depends on the population data. Population size reduction, extent of occurrence, area of occupancy, number of mature individuals. So lahat ito nakabase sa population data. So the more exploration you have, the more population survey you have, the more accurate will be your assessment. And so with its long record of comprehensive population survey for our priority threatened species, many of which are endemic, by the way. So the BGCI initiated a partnership with ETC for the red listing of all. At first, it was for the Philippine endemic trees only. But we had an expansion of the project, which considered also the near threatened trees, meaning those tree species that are found in the Philippines and probably one or two other countries. So by the way, these are the members of the GTA Philippines team. Forester Hibe and Forester Sulatre are from Energy Development Corporation, and the rest are from University of the Philippines, Los Baños. So to date, because June 2022, we don't have any update yet. For the latest update of IUCN is version 2022-1, and it still covers our assessment last June 2022. So the GTA Philippines teams have already completed the red list assessment of around 1,400 Philippine endemic trees, and 844 of which were already published in IUCN red list webpage. So if you will now search the conservation status of our Philippine trees, we now have the assessment of EDC, Energy Development Corporation. Now we have a local assessor, unlike before. Before we start the project, all Philippine trees, but it's only around 150 trees with IUCN red list assessment. But basically all are credited to the assessment of the World Monitoring Center, which is not Philippine based. Okay, so of the completed 1,311 species assessment, our assessment showed very alarming. 75% of our Philippine endemic trees have threatened status. 26% are critically endangered, 35% are endangered, and 14% are vulnerable. However, it is remarkable that our red list assessment showed significant differences with that of Philippine red list, which showed only the Philippine red list is issued as DAO 2017-11. So the DAO 2017-11 or the Philippine red list only showed 11% of the same set of species that we assess. Only 11% are threatened. And from this table, you can see the huge discrepancy. So 1,123 species, or about 86% of trees were categorized as OWS in the Philippine Red List. OWS is other wildlife species, which is equivalent to least concern of the IUCN. And worse, about 70% of the threatened species we classified are categorized as OWS by the Philippine Red List, including 242 critically endangered species. No? These are species na alam mong sa isang location na lang makikita, and then the assessment for Philippine Red List is OWS. So parang it's very easy to categorize it as critically endangered because population size wise, pasok na agad siya sa critically endangered status. So that's why we are very surprised how we wonder how the Philippine Red List, what criteria they use to put these three species as other wildlife species. Okay? And I cannot I should say this, though. Our assessment is based on the current data and population surveys of the Philippine endemic trees. Probably yun lamang namin, no? Kasi may population survey kami at talagang we followed the IUCN Red List criteria. So, and then another problem is that the Philippine Red List or the DAO 2017-11 is not just a list of threatened species, but it's also an administrative policy. It's also a law that everything listed as threatened in Philippine Red List is banned for cutting or banned for extraction. So with this data that I am showing, it seems that we are protecting the wrong species, right? Anyway, but we already we have already coordinated with the Philippine Red List Committee to harmonize our assessments, hopefully soon. Okay. Yeah, okay. So how about the threats? Why are trees threatened? So the main threat to tree species across the world, generally, is habitat loss. Yun pa rin naman, no? Particularly because of the slash and burn, kaingin, which affects 29% of species. It's followed by logging and other forms of wood harvesting, 27%, livestock farming, especially sa developed countries, 14%, and urban development, 13%. So other threats affecting large numbers of tree species include changes in the fire regimes, energy production and mining, and presence of invasive species. So although climate change currently affects only 4% of tree species that have been assessed, this threat is likely to intensify in future, with trees of coastal, dryland, and mountain ecosystem being the most vulnerable. And the relative importance of different threats to tree species varies between geographic regions. For instance, in northern temperate zone, the main threats to tree species are invasive species, pests, and diseases. Whereas in tropical regions, including South and Southeast Asia, the main threats are loss of habitat to agriculture and biological resources, such as logging. In the Philippines, we know that habitat loss is very evident. So according to the publication of Conservation International in 2011, the Philippines ranked fourth. Actually, we are tied for third, with Sundaland, with only 7% remaining original forest cover. But why are we so concerned with tree extinction? So I assume you already know the answer. So trees are of exceptional ecological importance. It plays a major functional role in the world's ecosystem, while also supporting many other plants, animals, and fungi. And trees provide multiple direct and indirect benefits to people, including economic and livelihood values, cultural and aesthetic values, and of course, ecological values. It is highly expected that loss of tree diversity could lead to abrupt declines in biodiversity, ecosystem functions and services, and ultimately ecosystem collapse. So let's discuss more about the implications of tree extinctions. When it comes to economic aspects, no? So several estimates are available for the total economic value of the world's forest. FAO in 2018 provided a figure of labor income derived from forests of more than 580 billion US dollars per year. And it supports more than 45 million jobs worldwide, with up to 60 million people being involved formally and informally in the forest sector. And of course, we know that timber is one of the world's most valuable natural commodities. The value of the global timber trade has more than doubled over the past 20 years, reaching $153 billion in 2018. And wood pulp accounts for a further $63 billion annually. And many tree species are also the source of non-timber forest products, in which global trade is estimated to be more than $88 billion annually. These products include foods such as fruits and nuts, ornamentals, medicinal, and aromatic plants. And in developing countries, wood fuel, the fuel wood and the charcoal, is particularly important product derived from trees, both for household use or for sale. So some 880 million people are estimated to spend time collecting fuel wood or producing coal. And more than 40 million people are engaged in commercial fuel wood and charcoal activities. And of course, we know that many of the people, most of these people depend on products and services provided by trees to support their livelihoods. For ecological values, as the dominant component of forest ecosystems, trees make a significant contribution to regulatory processes at the scale of the entire Earth system, such as climate regulation via carbon uptake, soil formation and stabilization, as well as cycling of nutrients and water. Trees and forest ecosystems have a major influence on global carbon cycle, and it accounts for about 75% of terrestrial gross primary production and 80% of Earth's total plant biomass. For soil formation and stabilization, key services relating to soil that are provided by trees include protection against erosion from rain, wind, coastal waves, reduction of downstream sedimentation, among others. And trees and forest ecosystems also play a crucial role in the provision of fresh water, owing to their major contribution to the hydrological cycle. Forests influence the amount of water available by regulating surface and ground water flows. And they also help prevent desertification and salinization. So needless to say, forest degradation, as well as the associated loss of tree species, will undermine such processes and will likely reduce the ability of forests to tolerate climate change and other disturbance factors such as fire, pests, pathogens, and invasive species. So as well as having direct use values, trees also play an important role for cultural, spiritual, aesthetic, and even recreational in many societies in the world. Trees are symbolically and spiritually important in most of the world's major religious traditions. As illustrated by if you know the species, this is Ficus religiosa, considered a holy tree by the Buddhists. And many indigenous people depend on trees for cultural identity and heritage kinship. And this is in the Philippines. It is best exemplified by this tree, Bulong Eta. According to the ITAS, the name Bulong Eta, it's a whispering tree. So it is where the ITAS whisper their wishes and for it to be granted by the deities. No? So kaya Bulong Aita yan. Okay. But anyway, so examples of these trees, this Ficus religiosa, Bulong Eta, or Jospyros Placentera. No? So itong mga trees na ito, where a species is irreplaceable to a culture or a people, it can be considered as cultural keystone species. Okay, so now we come to the suggested actions to reverse tree extinctions. First is to recognize the importance of tree species. It is important that all tree species have unique functions and ecological roles. Greater recognition and understanding of the specific importance of the roles of different tree species is needed from individuals, sa conservation organizations, government, and international policy community in order to mobilize and act to prevent the further extinction of tree species. In our experience in Binhi, in the rescue and documentation of Binhi, we realized that there is the tragedy of the uncommons. No? Those species without much value, dahil hindi nila masyadong kilala, hindi nila masyadong ginagamit, nasasacrifice para dito. And many of our threatened trees, marami dito ay hindi masyadong mahalaga economically, but ecologically, they are very important. No, so that's why ang ating dapat thinking is that every tree is important. Hindi man sa atin, baka sa ibang components of the ecosystem. Next is to conserve and restore natural tree populations. So worldwide, 2/3 of tree species are found in protected areas. So we call for the effective conservation of threatened trees within the global protected area network. No, 'di ba? Ang understanding natin, pag nasa protected areas 'yan, kaya nga protected area, the trees and the other components of the ecosystem are protected in that place, in that area. So unfortunately, alam natin, most of that protection are found only in papers. No? Hindi naman yan napoprotektahan on the ground. I was fortunate to be part of the team who evaluated the management effectiveness of protected areas. We did this last in 2015. And here are some of the gaps that we identified in our protected area system. So there is some misrepresentation. Some 2.6 million hectares of KBAs or key biodiversity areas are not covered by the protected area system. So here, yung red portions ay protected areas, yung green portions naman ay key biodiversity areas. So mapapansin natin, no? Ang daming mga green areas na hindi naman red, hindi covered by red. Meaning, walang law na to mandate its protection. So hindi sila sakop ng protected area. Aside from that, of course, yung management problems. Kulang na kulang sa capacity, both human resources and financial resources. Kulang na kulang. Okay? And ecological adequacy, this is related to the misrepresentation. No? So are we protecting enough to sustain key services? So pwede ba tayong magdagdag pa? So that is encouraged, no? Madagdagan pa. But considering na yung budget naman natin hindi ganoon kalaki. So we really need to be more smart in prioritizing conservation areas. So financing wise, the protected areas need at least 131 billion to be effectively managed. And again, there is continued threats. Okay. So improving the effectiveness of conservation management and monitoring populations of threatened species are highly suggested. Then third is to address the direct threats to tree species. action needs to be taken to address this each of the threats affecting the most threatened species. It should be supported by legal measures. In the Philippines, for instance, recognizing, di ba, nakita natin kanina that habitat loss from agricultural expansion and associated land cover change is the principal threat to most tree species. So therefore, steps need to be taken to ensure that trees are conserved within these agricultural landscapes. Unfortunately, all of the protected areas natin, meron ding mga IPs dyan o meron ding communities. And we cannot refrain those communities to look for source of livelihood. So we've been advocating this for so long that there should be a strict delineation of production and production zone in our protected areas, at least for the protection of the highly ecological important species. Next is to prioritize conservation action for tree species. So currently, there are more threatened tree species listed on the IUCN Red List than the number of threatened mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians combined. Yet, wala pa tayong, particularly in the Philippines, lahat ng ating conservation programs, all of our conservation programs, focused on animals. So wala tayong mga foundation for the conservation of orchids, foundation for conservation of cycads, na common ito sa ibang bansa, China, Korea, but until now wala pa ni isang conservation program for plant species. So we suggest that tree species can be considered as charismatic megaflora and should be considered for conservation flagship species. And as I have mentioned, as resources are limited, we need to prioritize conservation action for the most threatened trees. Next is to strengthen the role of trees in environmental and climate policy. So actions in support of tree conservation needs to be mandated by policies and legislation from local to international scales. So international policy should be implemented and applied to tree species with much greater resolve and commitment. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity should acknowledge and address the specific conservation needs of tree species. For example, by encouraging parties to develop action plans for those species that are threatened. Similarly, the policies and mechanisms of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, designed to reduce deforestation, should be rigorously supported with adequate provision of funding. We support the important pledge made at UNFCCC COP26 to halt and reverse deforestation and land degradation by 2030 and encourage all parties to ensure that the pledge is achieved in practice. On the other hand, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wildlife, Fauna, and Flora, or CITES, includes over 900 tree species in its appendices. So including species traded for timber, medical, and aromatic products. So the implementation of this illegal trade, or it needs the implementation, urgent implementation. It should be strengthened for tree species as well. Okay. So medyo bias nga kasi din sa fauna itong CITES. And then next is to strengthen the role of trees in sustainable development. So we know that the contribution of trees to support the well-being of hundreds of millions of people around the world, particularly those in rural areas, needs to be recognized. Trees are critical to global efforts aimed at ending poverty. So climate change, poverty, lahat yan kayang masagot nung pagkakaroon natin ng abundance of trees. And the value of trees to people needs to be reflected in policies and actions aimed at achieving poverty alleviation, such as on the Sustainable Development Goals. And then lastly, the most important is the most important thing is we should act now for trees. No? So none of these suggested actions, yung 1 to 6 kung binanggit kanina, can be achieved by individuals or by conservation organizations, business or government acting in isolation. In order to prevent tree extinction crisis, we need to develop a much wider partnership, including local communities, government agencies, and all other stakeholders. I just would like to shortly share with you what we are doing with this is Binhi 3.0, an upgrading of our previous Binhi program. So in our global tree assessment, we found out that again there are around 200 plus critically endangered tree species in the Philippines. All of them are endemic. So we prioritize those tree species that are critically endangered and are also island endemic. So 49 critically endangered species na island endemic siya. So we prioritize 4 provinces: Palawan, Davao, Samar, Ilocos. So just like the thing that we did for the first Binhi, we do extensive and purposive population survey for these 49 tree species. And these are some of the most threatened and rarest trees, itong 49 na to. No? So about 70% of these Binhi new priority species are known only in one location and never documented since publication. Kaya very challenging yung aming search ngayon. Hindi namin alam kung talagang nandyan pa ba sila, makikita pa ba namin sila, no? O baka extinct na rin sila in the wild. Just to share you some of our initial success, no? Una naming pinuntahan yung Ilocos. So meron kaming 7 priority species dyan. Anyway, these are just some. We have the species Alopilus Stenophilus, critically endangered, once collected in Burgos, Ilocos Norte. At single specimen lang yan. Fortunately, na-record namin yan. Na-redocument namin after more than 100 years. Same with Elmer's Pasnit, Kibatalia elmeri, last collected in Mount Bulusan, but was also present in Ilocos. No? So the last collection is 1916. Again, may bonus pa yung documentation namin because it's flowering when we encountered it. In Palawan, meron kaming 15 priority species dyan. One of those is yung Palawan putat, Barringtonia palawanensis. Although na-recollect ito dun sa last 1984, but after that, wala na ulit. So critically endangered to na sa Palawan din lang. So again, fortunately, may mga fruits pa kami nakuha and seeds, nakapagpatubo na rin kami nito. Nabanggit ko kanina yung tragedy of the uncommons. Many of these critically endangered species have no known economic value. And therefore, nothing interesting for research. No documentation except the original publication. And we have experienced na naghahanap kami ng critically endangered species, and then in a farm or in a kaingin area sa mountain, tinatabas-tabas lang nila. Endemic dun sa area na yon, but then dahil madami sa kanila, at small tree lang naman to, hindi masyadong economically important, akala nila walang value, tinatabas-tabas lang nila. So we explained them na kami nang galing pa sa Luzon, pumunta kami ng Mindanao to look for this species, and yet sila naman tinatabas ito para magtanim ng kape, ng kakao. Okay. So really there is problem in awareness. Poorly known, poorly conserved yan. That is why kailangan natin, ito yung advocacy namin sa Binhi. There must be, all provinces should use the critically endangered species in their province as their flagship species for conservation. And we all know that province endemic species, maliit na nga yung Pilipinas, and then doon lang makikita sa isang province, and therefore napakataas ng threats for these province endemic trees. And the goal is for the province to bring these endemic species critically endangered species back to abundance. And one of our best example for community partnership is the Calades narig. We consider this the rarest among the Philippine trees. 11 standing trees na lang yung nakita namin dyan. And we partnered with the Sangguniang Panlalawigan at everybody in the province is now very interested in conserving this. Dati-rati nung pumupunta kami dyan, parang hirap na hirap pa kaming kumuha ng guide. Walang sumama sa amin. But just last 2 weeks ago, nung nagpunta kami para sa mag-monitor ng phenology, kasama na namin ng DOT, DA, municipal, provincial, so lahat na ay nagko-converge for the conservation. So this is what we want for all the critically endangered species that we have. Okay, so yeah, we should just remember that we are facing an environmental crisis, the loss of biodiversity, the loss of trees. So I explained the importance of trees, the implications of the tree extinction. So let's not wait for the last tree to fall. Act now for trees. Thank you po for listening.